Okay, class, we're in section 8 of Ishmael. And if you remember, the narrator has been sent to find out the law of life, the law of how to live without killing each other, without killing everything on the planet. And he comes back after 4 days and he realizes four things. This will be page 126 in your book. All right. What he figures out is that number one, there are things that takers do that leavers and nobody else in the community of life, like animals, insects, all that stuff, there are things they don't do. And number one is first, takers exterminate their competitors, which is something that usually doesn't happen in the wild. You know, for instance, animals will defend their territories and their space, but they don't go out and wipe out a whole nother species. Right. Number two, takers will also systematically destroy their their competitors' food. Uh, for example, with the Native Americans, the Plains Indians were one of the biggest ones that gave people trouble, that resisted taker domination in the United States. And what happened was the takers put a bounty out on buffalo. You know, people started getting upset because Native Americans were being murdered, and people started saying, wait a minute. I don't know about, we're killing like children and, babies and stuff like that. Maybe we shouldn't do that. And then, next thing you know, the government says, well, if we can't kill the Native Americans, let's kill their food. So they put a bounty out on buffalo, and you turned in buffalo skulls or buffalo hides and you got money. And it was a way to starve the Native Americans out so that especially the Plains Indians, because they were fierce warriors and some of the strongest warriors, so we could, so they could, all their land and stuff could be taken. Okay, so that's number two. So number one, takers destroy their competitors. Number two, we destroy their competitors' food. Number three, you deny your competitors access to food. So, for example, here, around cattle, we put up fences to keep coyotes out. In the case of the Native Americans, you move them to a reservation where, they're not used to surviving and finding food. So it's a little bit harder, especially if that reservation's, in deserts and in places called like no man's land, because hardly any men can survive there. So you put them in a place and you deny them access to food. And in the case of the American government, you give them rotten meat and moldy bread and disease-ridden blankets. Right. So those are the three basic rules to the components of how to live life well on this planet. And I know that doesn't sound very glamorous, but think about it. If you want to live life well, you have to live your life in a way that does not kill your competitors, does not deny them access to food, and does not take away their food. Does not destroy their food. And that's how we live life on this planet without destroying our other species or ourselves. All right. So if you'll notice on page 129 in your book, he asked them, what does this do? And he basically defines it as a law of limiting competition. So what he means by that is you have to limit the way that you behave and the way that it impacts other species around you. And competition is what drives evolution. So if you think about it as a species, we're not competing with the wolf anymore. We're not competing with the tiger anymore. We've taken ourselves out of competition, and as a species, we've gotten weaker, which could eventually lead, to our extinction. So basically, what this whole metaphor wraps up is that whole town of the A's, the B's, and the C's. Why it was so peaceful there is because they never broke the rules. They never had one species like us that jumped up and broke these three rules, and it leads to extinction. And so, by following the laws of life, the law of nature, it promotes order. And like I've told you previously, you cannot break a law of gravity. And if you break this law of order, this law of competition, it leads to extinction, which is why we're in the situation we're in now. All right. All right. One thing, if you'll notice here, the bottom of the page, which is 73 in this electronic version, but it's page 129 and 130 in yours, is part of the problem is this eliminates diversity. The more species die off, the more chances that there are, if there's ever an extreme ecological disaster, like with the dinosaurs extinction, that the planet won't bounce back. One of the things with the dinosaurs is there was a lot of diversity. There was all kinds of life on the planet, and even though the meteorite and all the issues that killed the dinosaurs, it didn't kill everything on the planet because we had billions of different species. So even if you have billions of different species and a few billion die off, you've still got hundreds of millions and a billion species left. The problem with humans is that we're wiping out these species to the point at which they're not going to be able to come back. Because instead of having a billion species on the planet, we're whittling it down to just a million. So if there's another extreme ecological event like climate change, then all of a sudden everything dies. It can't bounce back. Now, I already gave you kind of a preview of this talk of the allegory of the hyenas on page 131 and 130, where I discussed it as like a group of hyenas jumps up and says, today we're going to kill all the lions. And then the population of gazelle goes up because there aren't as many lions eating this gazelle. And so the hyenas are able to eat them, and the population of hyenas goes up. So, all right, let's move up a little bit. All right. So again, as you can see on this page, our hyena population's going up, but then they say, hey, we killed all the lions, now let's kill all the cheetahs, all the other predators. And then all that's left is hyenas as far as a predator goes. So of course, the gazelle population booms and the zebras boom and they're able to eat all them. So population goes up again, but then, the gazelle are dying off. The cheetahs are dying, the gazelle are dying off, because they're being eaten and the hyena population is growing. So then they got to say, well, let's think about the other stuff out there. What other stuff? We killed everything that eats gazelles. Now, what about the stuff that eats what the gazelles eat, right? Like caterpillars eating the grass and, other animals that eat the grass that we don't eat, like grasshoppers. Let's kill them too. So then all of a sudden, all you're left with is gazelles, grass, and hyena. And then, then you're like, oh, well, there's other stuff that's out there that's taking up space that are, gazelle don't eat. So let's kill that too. Let's kill the trees. Let's kill the bushes. So then all that's left is just grass and hyena and gazelle. And then what it does is that eliminates diversity. And if you do that over the entire planet, as we humans tend to do, one little sickness comes through, something that affects the grass, or you have an unusually hot summer and all the grass dries up and dies, or whatever, then the entire food system crashes because it's eliminated diversity. And that's one of the things that this hyena allegory is all about, is we're the hyenas, and we've eliminated a lot of the stuff that we compete with to eat our food. And then like things like trees and stuff like that, we eliminate those so we can have farmland so we can grow just the stuff that we eat. And then we eliminate anything that's not our food, and we eliminate things that eat our food. And basically what's happened is by doing this, we spread civilization and we've eliminated biodiversity. So we're in danger of the whole system collapsing. All right. All right. So the problem that we have defined here right before chapter 6 in this section, as you can see right here, is unlimited growth. That's the problem with agriculture, is it causes unlimited growth. And any one species cannot grow to an unlimited rate, or it destroys all the species. So basically, we've kind of taken ourselves out of this. And, Mother Culture is one of the things behind this. As you can see here at the bottom, page 78 on your screen, and this is actually page 136 and 137 in your book. Mother Culture tells us that we're exempt from this. That first of all, this doesn't apply to us, and even if it does, we can do things like birth control. And see, that's the problem. That's a problem. We always try to use science to handle it, and it never works. Like I was telling you in class, when I was a kid, you had the Feed the World, We Are the World song, everybody feed everybody that's starving in Africa. And all it did was that food created more people. And, now you have millions and millions of starving people in Africa instead of just, a few thousands. And the answer to this always is science. So the answer is, we'll use birth control. We'll use birth control. That'll be the answer. We'll use birth control. But the problem is, you don't see commercials out there saying for just 25 cents a day, you can give someone birth control in Africa. It just doesn't work like that. So, science always provides these answers, but, it doesn't always work, especially if you have a dominant religion in that country that's trying to, just trying to make itself grow by telling people that birth control is a sin. And I'm talking about Catholicism, right? And until recently, that was their stance. And recently they changed that stance on birth control in Africa and said, birth control is not a sin anymore just for you guys in Africa. The rest of the world it still is. And, which is a good business idea because you can breed an ever-growing flock of churchgoers, right? But we always try to solve these things with birth control, and it just, it never fully works out. All right. So you may say to yourself, hey, looking at page 138 and 139 in your book, and, page, this here, we say things like, we're not going to let the flood come. We're not going to, let the drowning affect us. We're not going to let nature affect us, because we can control things. And that's what the book is talking about defying God. If you live in the hands of the gods, you live like other animals and you accept that floods and droughts and stuff like that negatively affect your population. But you defy God if you try to alter this. All right. So on this page, as you can see, they're talking about, food production. And, one of you guys in the class, you may ask, well, if America produces so much food, how come our population isn't exploding the way that India's is or the way that China's is? And the answer to that is quite simple. Your population explodes where the food goes. And one of the things that we do is we send food overseas. And so why do we do that? Why do we send food overseas? Honestly, I got to tell you, for a lot of people, it's not out of the goodness of our hearts. But if you want to sit in class and you want to wear, fairly cheap shirts and clothing and stuff like that, the way that you get those products made is by having them made overseas, because it can be done cheaply there by some 12-year-old girl in a sweatshop who only gets 2 bathroom breaks a day and makes 10 cents an hour. So that way these big companies, can sell us these products that they, make very cheaply, and make huge money on. So basically the real reason why we send food overseas is so that we can breed a workforce for factories in third world countries. It's not out of any kind of noble idea of feeding somebody else. It's simply because we need people to make stuff so we can have it for cheap here. Right? All right. So, another idea here was talking about New Yorkers and the idea of taker civilization versus leaver civilization. This may work well for your compare and contrast essay. Is that in taker civilization, you can move from country to country fairly easily. Back in the tribal days, you could only go into another tribe's land if you had permission, if you knew them, if they were friendly or allies or related or you traded. And like I showed you with that, map of California with all the different tribes, everybody had their own languages, everybody had their own distinct cultures and ways of dressing. So you couldn't just walk into another tribal land and like blend in. But see, there's nothing to stop like New Yorkers from moving to Georgia or somebody moving to Arizona or New Mexico or Colorado, as it says here in the middle of the screen. Right? And that's kind of one of the aspects of taker civilization. That way they can spread their civilization worldwide with no resistance. All right. So, moving on towards the end of section 8 here, we find out that these laws cannot be broken, because there is, consequence. And that's what I think we're seeing with this coronavirus. That's what I think we're seeing, with extinction everywhere, as we have broken these laws and now we're starting to pay the price. So the difference between leavers and takers is this. Leavers believe the world was not made for any one species and that it's not our job to conquer it and rule it, but takers believe the exact opposite, right? So leavers follow the rule of competition, takers break it. All right. So that is the end of section 8.